constraints-led approach, using Newell's model to apply environment design framework and human movement framework to coaching observations. In this diagram, you can see a constraints-led approach. Using Newell's model of constraints to apply EDF and HMF to coaching observations, using the video and clips provided to discuss the issues in coaching for learning versus coaching for performance, justifying my critique by using relevant academic literature. The participants are the first team squad from Cheltenham Hockey men's section, who play in the England Hockey National League. The footage looks to explore environmental constraints within the session. A constraints-led approach is a coaching method based on the principles of non-linear pedagogy. It advocates a more hands-off approach to coaching. Through the manipulation of certain constraints, different information is presented to the learner. In turn, the learner is then challenged and channeled to find their own movement solutions to the problems faced or the goals needed to be achieved. These constraints are the boundaries in which the athletes can search for the solutions. The literature that promotes a constraints-led approach suggests there is a close relationship between the movement of the individual and the environment they are in. The constraints that can be manipulated can be classified into three distinct categories: the performer, the environment, and the task. Personal constraints refer to the action capabilities and cognitive capabilities of an individual. Movement solutions for athletes may be very different. Along with physical aspects, they are also functional. These can include affective behaviours, motivations, and other emotions. Many of these constraints we have limited control over, but awareness of them. Environmental constraints refer to characteristics of surroundings such as altitude, noise, and lighting. Task constraints refer to the characteristics of a specific game, such as rules, equipment, and playing surfaces. A widely used method to create more appropriate training environments are small-sided games, where the number of players and playing area are scaled to influence on the technical and physiological demands of the game. A quote from Davids, Button and Bennett in 2008 states, "It's the design of games using different scoring systems that require the players to use particular techniques or strategies to win the game. Simply tell the players the scoring system and then just let them play. Allow them time to determine the most appropriate strategy or response rather than explicitly telling them the solution." Each clip demonstrates 8v8 in a game situation, using half the pitch having goals at each end using bibs to allow players to identify their team members. 8v8 is a useful fitness drill. You are using half the pitch, therefore have much more space to pass into. However, it also works on man marking as you have to cover greater distance. Throughout the video, you can see that it looks a lot like an actual game of hockey. The benefits of this is that it creates an accurate environment that they can take into the game. It is deemed that small-sided games help underpin the concepts as it allows functional patterns to emerge from the interactions between a system of components. During this learning phase, people are exposed to mess. The idea influences understanding to why chaos emerges, and it becomes evident when learning is happening in the way athletes aren't used to. It is not clear why behaviours emerge this way, but literature from Bellot 2000 states that due to patterns occurring, patterns emerge, thanks to the impact of the interaction between both the athlete and the place in which they do the task. Evidently, this shows that people will autonomously organise themselves to perform a task better. Non-linear pedagogy takes a constraints-led approach to sport. Coaches tend to have more experiential methods when conducting their training. Athletes are taught using a number of different stages which build them up slowly to full gameplay. Typically, those who learn through a non-linear approach take longer to achieve their goals. However, they are more likely to stay at the top for longer than those who learn using a linear approach. Using small-sided games instead of a drill-led session allows coaches to create chaos in hoping that their athletes will problem solve. Non-linear pedagogy relates highly to coaching for learning and coaching. Fundamentally, the coach is helping the individual to improve their performance. In other words, helping them to learn. Coaching is unlocking a person's potential to maximise their own performance. It is helping them to learn rather than teaching them, whereas coaching for performance can be very linear based, as you will use drills, repetition and technical demonstrations. Even though athletes will learn how to perform the skill or play a certain way, you question if they have learned how to do it, or do they perform because that's what they have been told to do. As you can see from the footage, the style and type of training is highly linked to non-linear pedagogy. In the squad, there are a variety of experienced players. Some players have a high knowledge of the game, and these players are expected and encouraged to show leadership, adapt drills, give feedback to other players. Training sessions are used to assist players reach goals and targets to the next level to develop their skills. However, it has to be clear it is to assist and not always to lead. Players, through trial and error, making mistakes and having freedom to express their skills without being stifled, should aim to develop themselves. At this level, most players know what's correct and what isn't. Most know that they can actually discover their own ways to be successful. Players learn through discovery as it's more meaningful to the individual. Players have a better satisfaction if they can problem solve themselves. However, the most important thing is that players learn how to make decisions. This cannot be done if a coach gives all the answers and is constantly telling players what to do. For example, run there, pass now, use a hit. The design of the training session was to look at man marking, as this is the system they use in games. Footage from the games has proven that goals or mistakes have came from poor marking around the pitch. Man marking involves extreme amount of fitness, not only physically but mentally too. Training players to man mark autonomously is a process that can take ages for players to become comfortable doing. Small-sided games promotes players thinking about how they can cope with different situations. The use of small-sided games is paramount as players touch the ball more. It has become clear how performers can exploit information to regulate action from movements of other players. Specifying variables for each action need to be constantly available for perception in the practice and performance environment. Practice tasks constraints that provide specifying variables for pickup by learners during competitive performance can be considered to be high in representative task design. Changing the informational constraints in practice environments might lead to the design of less representative practice tasks by altering availability of specifying variables, resulting in changes to a learner acquisition of functional movement patterns. The pickup of non-specifying variables might result in performance success under specific task constraints, but perseverers may become too dependent on these variables even when performing task constraints change. In sports performance, as levels of competition increase, those athletes that continue to rely on non-specifying variables will eventually become less competitive than their counterparts who have learnt to pick up specifying variables to regulate action. An important feature of the constraints-led approach is the coupling between perception and action. The practice creates a realistic environment for players to learn without creating an unrealistic reflection of a game setting, allowing players freedom without cones and setting boundaries of what part of the pitch they can use. In a game, there will be no cones or boundaries on where players are allowed. This drill involves players each being responsible for defending against specific attacking players from the opposing team. Small-sided games demonstrate that the reduction of the number of players led to an increase in the number of successful passes, skilled actions, successful actions, and high and low pressure moments that would all come into account in a game situation. Playing field hockey with 8 players per side as opposed to the standard 11 players per side seems to be beneficial in creating additional opportunities for the execution of key field hockey skills. Such conditions provide athletes with more opportunities to attune the key affordances to freeze information, movement couplings, and create stable movement patterns. Lowering the number of players also increased the amount of high-pressure moments, although it was expected that lowering the number of players would provide players with more time and space to make their next decision. It seems that playing field hockey with fewer players makes it easier for young children to mark their own opponent, as there are less free opponents and apply more pressure on them. Such pressure moments subsequently resulted in less time for the players to make the decisions and perform successful actions, i.e. dribble or pass. This time, constraint likely forced players to focus on the more specific perceptual information of their teammates and or opponents in order to guide their movements and perform a successful action. The increase in high-pressure moments coupled with the increase in the successful actions when playing numbers are reduced suggests this constraint successfully forces players to focus on key information from the environment to guide their movement and positively shape their decision making. It can be concluded that match performance of hockey players is strongly influenced by the interaction between task constraints and their specific action capabilities. This would indicate that the affordances during gameplay are predominantly action-scaled affordances, also highlighting the importance of coaches having a clear understanding of the impact of the constraints they choose to manipulate. In particular, it is crucial to understand how various constraints interact with each other, in turn establish specific information movement couplings to enhance skill performance and acquisition.